Good morning, history students. Today's going to be a little different. As you can see, you don't see me today. Today really is about listening and paying attention and almost just general enjoyment. So I am not going to present all of the text for you today. So what we're going to be reading is a fairy tale. It's a very old fairy tale. It's called The Prince Who Knew His Fate. I want you to just listen and think about what we've learned about ancient Egypt and how this story fits into history, because literature is often based on the things that are going on in an area or the beliefs of the people who tell the tale. So today we're going to read The Prince Who Knew His Fate. If you want to follow along, you can open your own text in a separate tab and follow along. Otherwise, you can just listen to me tell the story and look at the illustrations as we go on. Okay, before we start, the scene. This story takes place in ancient times in Egypt and in an area that is now Iraq. The characters. The first characters introduced are the king of Egypt, his son, and the 7 Hathor goddesses who predict the prince's death. When the prince travels, he meets Chief of Naharin and his daughter. The plot. For many years, the king of Egypt protects his son from the death that was predicted for him. The prince convinces his father to let him travel. He meets a princess, and together they try to prevent his fate. Vocabulary preview for this story, so things you may or may not know. Destiny means an already determined course of events. Ferried, F-E-R-R-I-E-D, means carried by boat. Enchant means to cast a spell on something. Fugitive, a person who runs away or escapes. Folly is a foolish action. Vessel, V-E-S-S-E-L, is a container, and exalting means praising. So in this story, a prince must avoid 3 types of animals because it is predicted that one of them would kill him. The people who love him try to prevent him from coming in contact with the animals, but the prince does not want to live in fear. So before we read, this is one of the world's oldest known fairy tales. It was written in hieroglyphics more than 3,000 years ago. The places in the tale are real, and the prince and princess may have been based on real people as well. The ancient Egyptians often made important people the main characters in their stories. Here we go. There once was a king of Egypt who had no sons at all. So the king asked the gods of his time for a son, and they decided that he should have one. The 7 Hathor goddesses came to decide the boy's fate, and they declared, "He is destined to be killed by a crocodile, or a snake, or a dog." The people who were at the boy's side heard this. They reported it to the king, and his heart grew sad. The king had a house of stone built for the boy at the edge of the desert, supplied with servants, and with all sorts of good things from the palace, for the child was not to go outside. There the boy grew up. One day he climbed up to the roof of the house and saw a dog following a man who was walking along the road. "What is that?" he asked his servant. "It is a dog," the servant replied. "Let me have a dog like that," the boy said. The servant reported this to the king, and the king said, "His heart is sad. Let him have a bounding little puppy." So they gave the boy a dog. In time, the young prince grew restless, and he sent a message to his father saying, "Why should I stay here doing nothing? After all, my destiny has been determined. Allow me to do as I wish until I meet my fate." The king replied, saying, "Let a chariot be prepared for him, equipped with all sorts of weapons, and assign a servant to accompany him." So they did as the king commanded, and gave him all that he needed. Then they ferried him across the Nile to the east bank and said to him, "Now go as you wish." And the dog was with him. The prince traveled as he pleased northward across the desert, living on the best of all desert game. Thus he came to the realm of the chief of Naharin, who had no children, except one daughter. He had built a house for her, with a window 70 cubits from the ground. The chief of Naharin then sent for all the sons of all the chiefs of Karu, saying, "He who can jump up to the window of my daughter shall have her as for his wife." The sons of all the chiefs had been trying to reach the window each day for many days when the prince passed by them. They took the prince to their house, and they bathed him, they rubbed him with oil, and they bandaged his feet. They gave fodder to his horses and food to his servant. They did everything for the young man. And to start a conversation, they said, "Where do you come from, you handsome youth?" "I am the son of a chariot officer from Egypt. My mother died, and my father took another wife. My stepmother grew to hate me, and I have fled her." They welcomed him and kissed him. Several days later, the prince asked the youth, "What are you doing here in Naharin?" "The past 3 months we have spent each day jumping, for the chief of Naharin will give his daughter to the one who reaches her window," they said. "Oh, if only I could enchant my feet, I would jump with you," said the prince. The youths went off to jump, as it was their daily custom, while the prince stood at a distance watching. From her window, the daughter of Chief Naharin gazed at him. At last, there we go. Here she is, gazing at him. At last, when many days had passed, the prince joined the son of the chiefs. He jumped, and he reached the window of the daughter of the chief of Naharin. She embraced him, and she kissed him. A messenger went to inform her father. "One of the young men has reached the window of your daughter," the messenger said. "Whose son is it?" the chief of Naharin inquired. "He is the son of a chariot officer from Egypt. He has fled from his stepmother." The chief of Naharin grew very angry. "Am I to give my daughter to a fugitive from Egypt? Send him home." "You must go back where you came from," the messenger said to the prince. But the princess clung to the prince, and she swore, "As Rhea lives, if they take him from me, I will not eat, I will not drink, I will die within the hour." When the messenger had reported everything she had said to her father sent men to kill the prince, then and there. Again the princess swore, "As Rhea lives, if they kill him, I shall die before sunset. I will not live an hour more than he." They repeated this to her father, and the chief of Naharin had the prince and his daughter brought before him. The young man impressed the chief, who welcomed him and kissed him and said, "Now you are like my son. Tell me about yourself." "I am the child of a chariot officer from Egypt," said the young man. "My mother died, and my father took another wife. She grew to hate me, and I have fled from her." The chief of Naharin gave his daughter to the prince, and he gave him a house and fields and herds and everything they needed. When they had lived together for some time, the young man told his wife, "I know my fate. I shall be killed by one of three, a crocodile or a snake or a dog." "Then," she said, "the dog that follows you everywhere must be killed." "That would be folly," he replied. "I will not have the dog killed, for I have had it since it was a puppy." So his wife began to watch over him closely, and she did not allow him to go out alone. It so happened that on the very day the prince arrived in Naharin, the crocodile, his fate, began to follow him. It caught up with him in the town where the prince lived with his wife. But there in the lake was a giant who would not let the crocodile out, and so the crocodile refused to let the giant out. For 3 whole months they had been fighting all day long, beginning each day at sunrise. The prince spent many pleasant days in his house, and in the evenings, when the breeze died down, he went to bed. One evening, when sleep had overcome him, his wife filled a vessel with wine and another with beer. Then she sat down beside him, but she did not sleep. A snake came out of its hole, intending to bite the prince, but the vessels tempted it, and the snake drank from them, got drunk, and rolled over on its back to sleep. His wife chopped the snake into 3 pieces with her axe. Then she roused her husband and said to him, "See, your God has placed one of his fates in your hands. He is protecting you." The prince made offerings to his god Re, adoring him and exalting his power each day that passed. After some time, the prince went for a stroll around his estate. His wife stayed at home, but his dog followed him. Suddenly, the dog turned on him, and the prince fled from it. He ran to the edge of the lake and jumped into the water to escape the dog. But there, the crocodile seized him and dragged him off to find the giant. "I am pursuing you, for I am your fate," said the crocodile. "Listen, for 3 whole months I have been fighting with the giant. I will let you go now if you will take my side and kill the giant when he returns to fight." So the prince waited by the water all that night, and when dawn broke and the second day began, the giant returned. The giant began to fight the crocodile at once, but the prince stepped forward with his scimitar, that's a type of curved sword, in his hand. He cut out the heart of the giant, and the giant died. At that very moment, the dog sneaked up behind the prince. It attacked him and tore him to bits and spread all the pieces all about. When the prince failed to return, his wife set out to look for him. After 7 days and 7 nights in search of him, she came upon his remains. She collected all the pieces of her husband's body and put them back together again, except for his heart. That she placed in a lotus flower, which was blooming on the water. Lo and behold, the prince reappeared as he had been before. From that day on, the prince and princess lived together happily until they crossed over to the fields of the blessed. Okay, so I want you to think about what we've learned about fairy tales in the past. That wasn't in 6th grade. That was probably, I think, 3rd or 4th. But I also want you to think about what we've learned about what the Egyptians already believe, what we've learned about mummification and why they did that, and how this fairy tale fits into that, right? There were pieces of this fairy tale that are similar to ones you already know as well. So I want you to just think about how this story fits the history of the time that we're learning about. And other than that, you have no assignment for today because I really want you to just appreciate and enjoy the story. So with that, I will talk to you all tomorrow. Have a good afternoon.